My girlfriend's wealthy parents hated me before we'd even met. On my way to their mansion for the first time, I stopped to fix an old woman's vintage Rolls-Royce on the side of the road. I arrived an hour late, covered in grease, ready for them to throw me out, and then the woman I had just helped pulled up behind me. Before we get into it, I have a question. What's the most stressful meet the parents moment you've ever had or heard of? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more stories every day. Okay, let's head out to that lonely country road. The phone call with my girlfriend Emily was supposed to be a final, reassuring pep talk. Instead, it was a masterclass in anxiety. I was standing in my small apartment, already sweating in my best and only suit, and her voice on the other end was a tight, frantic whisper. "Okay, Jake, just remember the plan," she said. "When my father asks what you do not say you own a garage. You say you're in specialized automotive management. And if my mother asks about your hands, you tell her you've been doing some recreational woodworking. Whatever you do not mention the words engine oil or transmission fluid." "Emily, honey," I said, trying to make a joke of it. "I am a mechanic. It's what I do. It's who I am. I built my business from the ground up. I'm proud of it." "I know you are," she whispered, and I could hear the genuine pain in her voice. "And I'm proud of you, but they're different. They come from a different world. They won't understand. Just for me, Jake. Just for tonight. Can you please just play the part?" I sighed. I would do anything for Emily, and that included pretending to be a man I was not, for a few hours, to impress her insufferably snobby parents, Robert and Margaret Bennett. I'd never met them, but I'd heard the stories. Stories of their country club memberships, their charity galas, their quiet but absolute judgment of anyone who didn't fit into their narrow old money world. And I, a blue-collar guy with grease under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove, was the walking embodiment of everything they disdained. I spent 10 minutes scrubbing my hands with a stiff bristled brush until they were red and raw. A futile attempt to erase the evidence of my life's work. I got into my meticulously clean vintage pickup truck, a vehicle I'd restored with my own 2 hands, and started the long drive out of the city and into their world. The further I drove, the more the landscape changed. Grimy city blocks gave way to sprawling suburbs, which then melted into vast, rolling hills of pristine horse country. The road narrowed, and soon I was driving past massive gated estates, each one a fortress of wealth and privilege. I checked my watch. I was actually going to be a few minutes early, a small, manageable victory. And then, as I rounded a long, sweeping curve, I saw it. It was a car, but it wasn't just a car. It was a work of art, a magnificent 2-toned 1960s Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, parked awkwardly on the gravel shoulder, its great silver hood propped open. Standing beside it, looking utterly and completely helpless, was an elderly woman. She was the picture of elegance, dressed in a tweed jacket and pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She was staring at the silent, smoking engine with a look of profound, aristocratic frustration. My mind immediately started racing. "Keep driving," a voice that sounded suspiciously like Emily's whispered in my head. "You can't be late. Not today. This is not your problem." But another deeper voice, the voice of the man I actually was, took over. That was a classic, a masterpiece, and it was in trouble. And the woman looked like she was about to have a very bad day. With a groan of resignation at my own character, I slowed my truck and pulled over in front of her. I got out, leaving my suit jacket on the seat. "Trouble, ma'am?" I asked, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. She looked at me, her eyes sharp and intelligent, taking in my suit pants and dress shirt with a hint of surprise. "It just stopped," she said, her voice a crisp, cultured tone. Made a rather dreadful clunking sound, and then a great deal of smoke. My driver was supposed to follow me, but he seems to have gotten lost. Mind if I take a look? I asked. I know a thing or two about these old engines. She gave me a long, appraising look, then nodded. Be my guest. I leaned under the massive hood, the familiar, beautiful scent of hot oil and aged metal filling my senses. To me, this was a symphony. I saw the problem in less than 30 seconds. A frayed wire on the distributor cap, a classic issue with this model. An easy fix if you knew what you were doing. It's just a loose connection, ma'am, I told her. I can have it patched up and running in about 20 minutes. But I looked down at my clean hands and my dress shirt. It's going to get a little greasy, young man, she said, a small, wry smile on her face. If you can make this beautiful old beast run again, I do not care if you have to cover yourself in mud to do it. And so I went to work. I pulled my small emergency toolkit from my truck. I got my hands dirty. I carefully stripped the wire, reconnected it, and wrapped it securely with electrical tape. We talked as I worked. She didn't ask what I did for a living. She asked me about the car. She was sharp, knowledgeable. She loved this vehicle, and she was genuinely impressed by my expertise. When I was finished, I wiped my greasy hands on a rag from my truck. Okay, ma'am, I told her. Try her now. She got in, turned the key, and the great, powerful engine purred to life, a deep, satisfying rumble. She beamed, a genuine, beautiful smile of pure joy. Young man, you are a miracle worker, she exclaimed. How can I possibly repay you? Just knowing she's running again is all the payment I need, I said, my own heart full. You have a wonderful day, ma'am. You as well, she said, her intelligent eyes seeming to hold mine for a long moment. Then, with a final grateful nod, she put the car in gear and drove away, a queen in her newly resurrected chariot. I watched the beautiful old car disappear down the road, a warm feeling of a job well done in my chest. A feeling that immediately turned to ice as I finally looked down at my hands, which were now streaked with black grease. And then, at my watch, I was now over an hour and 5 minutes late. The sun was a fiery orange ball, sinking below the rolling, tree-lined hills. The dinner was supposed to have started at 6. I rehearsed my apology in my head as I drove the final 2 miles to the Bennett estate. I am so sorry, sir. There was an elderly woman, a real emergency, a classic car. It sounded flimsy, pathetic, like the kind of cheap, unbelievable excuse a schoolboy would invent. These were not the kind of people who would appreciate the nuances of a broken-down vintage automobile. These were people, as Emily had so carefully explained to me, who valued one thing above all else: appearances. And I, with my greasy hands, my dirt-stained suit pants, and my unforgivable tardiness, was about to make the worst first impression in human history. The entrance to the estate was marked by 2 massive stone pillars, but no gate. It was a statement of quiet, old-money confidence. The driveway, a long, winding river of perfectly white gravel, crunched under my tires. It led through a landscape so perfectly manicured it looked unreal, finally opening up to reveal the house itself. Mansion was the only word for it. A sprawling, 3-story brick Georgian manor with dozens of tall, glittering windows, all of them lit from within like a grand, festive cruise ship. I parked my humble, if lovingly restored, pickup truck at the far end of a circular driveway that was already lined with expensive German sedans. I felt like a dinghy tying up next to a fleet of yachts. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to clean the grease from under my fingernails with a useless paper napkin from the glove box, a futile gesture that only seemed to smear the blackness. This was it. I took a deep, steadying breath, got out of my truck, and began the long, lonely walk to the imposing front door. I rang the bell. The sound echoed deep and sonorous somewhere in the vastness of the house. I waited. After what felt like an eternity, the heavy dark wood door swung open, and there was Emily. Her face, which I'd last seen on a video call full of beautiful, anxious hope, was now a mask of pure, horrified shock. "Jake," she whispered, her eyes wide as they took in my appearance, my disheveled hair, my grease-stained hands, the dirt on my suit. "Oh my God, what happened to you? Are you okay? I was so worried. I tried calling you." "I'm so sorry, Em," I began, my own voice a low, apologetic rumble. "I can explain. I was on my way, and there was this old woman on the side of the road. Her car had broken down, and I felt I had to stop and help her." But I never got to finish. Two figures emerged from the grand hallway behind her, stepping into the warm glow of the porch light. It was them, Robert and Margaret Bennett. They were exactly as Emily had described them, only more so. He was tall and silver-haired, dressed in a perfectly tailored smoking jacket. His face was a mask of cold, aristocratic disdain. She was impossibly elegant, her pearls gleaming, her expression of bored, chilly disapproval. They looked at their daughter's horrified face, and then they looked at me, and their expressions hardened into something that was beyond simple disapproval. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "So," Robert Bennett said, his voice a low, cutting drawl that was as sharp and as cold as a shard of glass. "This is him, the mechanic." "I am so incredibly sorry for my tardiness, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett," I stammered, my carefully rehearsed speech turning to ash in my mouth. "There was a woman on the road. Her vintage car had broken down, and I felt I had to stop and help her." Robert held up a hand, silencing me instantly. "We do not care for your excuses, young man. Punctuality in our world is not a suggestion. It is the baseline requirement of respect, a requirement you have clearly failed to meet on this, our very first meeting." His wife, Margaret, then stepped forward, her eyes as cold and as hard as her diamond earrings, raking over my appearance with a look of physical disgust. She looked at my greasy hands, and a small, cruel smile touched her lips. "Emily told us you are a man who works with his hands," she said, her voice dripping with sweet, venomous disdain. "I see you've made no effort to hide the fact. How charmingly rustic of you." I just stood there, speechless. The double-barreled shotgun blast of their snobbery had left me completely disarmed. "I think it's best if we reschedule this visit, Jake," Robert said, his tone one of a man dismissing a servant. He was not even looking at me anymore. He was looking at his daughter. "Perhaps for a time when your friend can present himself with a modicum of the dignity we expect in this house." He then turned his back on me, a final, absolute act of dismissal. Defeat was a cold, bitter taste in my mouth. I had failed. I had played their game, and I had lost spectacularly. I gave Emily one last heartbroken look, a silent apology for not being the man her family wanted, and I turned to walk back into the darkness, my future with her feeling as distant and as cold as the stars. But before I could take a single step off the grand, imposing porch, the sound reached me. It was a sound I knew intimately, the deep, beautiful, and profoundly familiar rumble of a classic V12 Rolls-Royce engine. A pair of bright, powerful headlights swept across the manicured lawn, illuminating the four of us in a sudden, dramatic glare. I froze, my hand on the railing, my heart giving a single, hopeful, and utterly confused leap. I knew that sound. I knew that car. The magnificent two-toned silver cloud glided to a whisper-quiet stop behind my humble pickup truck. For a moment, no one on the porch moved. Robert and Margaret Bennett stared, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and annoyance at this unexpected interruption of their triumph. Emily just watched, her earlier despair now tinged with a deep questioning curiosity. The driver's side door of the Rolls-Royce opened with a soft, satisfying click. A chauffeur, impeccably dressed in a dark suit and cap, stepped out and moved with practiced, formal grace to open the rear passenger door. A hand emerged first, an elegant, pale hand adorned with a single, massive sapphire ring that seemed to drink the light from the porch. Then, slowly, regally, the occupant of the car stepped out. It was her. It was the woman from the side of the road. My mother-in-law-to-be was the first to speak, her voice a high-pitched squeak of utter astonishment that completely shattered her cold, controlled facade. "Mother, what are you doing here? And in that old thing? I told you the driver would pick you up in the town car." The woman, Catherine Bennett, Emily's grandmother and the undeniable, universally feared matriarch of the entire Bennett clan, completely and totally ignored her daughter. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, the same pale blue eyes that had watched me with such curiosity as I worked, scanned the scene before her. They took in the rigid, angry posture of her son-in-law, the flustered, guilty expression of her daughter, Emily's tear-streaked confusion, and finally my own disheveled, grease-stained form. She began to walk towards the porch, her steps surprisingly brisk and full of a purpose that seemed to make the very air around her crackle. Robert and Margaret, who just moments ago had been the imperious lords of this manor, now looked like two petulant, scolded children. Catherine Bennett stopped at the bottom of the steps, directly in front of me. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and held a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a moment on my grease-stained hands, the dirt on my knee, the slightly rumpled state of my suit. A lesser man would have wilted under such intense scrutiny, but her gaze didn't feel judgmental. It felt analytical, like a master craftsman examining a piece of unfamiliar but well-made furniture. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face, a smile that held a universe of amusement and a great deal of something else I was just beginning to understand: respect. "Robert," she said, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the stunned silence like a well-struck bell. "Margaret." Her tone brooked no argument. It was a quiet command. "This young man," she gestured towards me with her glittering hand, "who you seem to be in the process of throwing off your property, just spent the better part of an hour lying on the cold, damp shoulder of a country road to fix my car, after your perpetually reliable driver apparently took a wrong turn to another continent." Robert finally found his voice, though it was a strained, uncertain croak. "Mother, we didn't know. He arrived an hour late for dinner, and he's a mess." Catherine Bennett cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "A mess?" she said, her eyebrows arching with dangerous, ironic amusement. "This is not a mess, Robert. This is the mark of a man who is not afraid to do real work. A man who stops to help a stranger in need, even when it makes him late for a very important meeting." She then looked directly at her daughter. "A measure of character, Margaret, that no amount of money or status can buy, and a quality that seems to be in desperately short supply in this household lately." She then turned her back on her stunned, horrified children and gave me her full, undivided attention. Her smile was now a thing of genuine warmth. "You have my deepest gratitude, young man," she said. "You possess a rare and valuable skill, and even rarer, the kindness to use it without asking for anything in return." She then did something that I believed sealed my in-law's fate. She took my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. A clear, public gesture of alliance. "Come along, Jake," she said, her smile radiating genuine delight. "It seems I have arrived just in time to save you from what I am sure was about to be a dreadfully boring and judgmental evening. You will join me for dinner." I walked, stunned and in a daze, up the steps of that grand mansion, not as a disgraced mechanic, but on the arm of the one woman who could make kings and CEOs tremble. The interrogation I had been dreading was over before it had even begun. But as I glanced back at the pale, horrified faces of Robert and Margaret, I realized that a new, far more interesting, and for them, far more terrifying trial was just about to begin. And my angry in-laws were now the ones in the dock. I was a grease-stained mechanic, walking into a mansion where I was already despised, certain I'd be thrown out before I could even explain myself. But now, I was on the arm of Catherine Bennett, the matriarch of the family, who just turned my humiliating dismissal into a moment of triumph. As we stepped into the grand foyer, I could feel the weight of every eye on me, especially the furious, disbelieving stares of Emily's parents, Robert and Margaret. They'd planned to bury me, but Catherine had other ideas, and I was about to find out just how much power she held in this house. The air inside the Bennett mansion was cool, laced with the scent of polished wood, expensive candles, and the faint, mouth-watering aroma of a gourmet meal being prepared. My heart was still pounding from the surreal turn of events on the porch, but Catherine's grip on my arm was steady, grounding me like an anchor. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime commanding rooms, her sapphire ring glinting under the chandelier's light. Behind us, Robert and Margaret trailed like scolded children, their earlier arrogance replaced by a stunned, resentful silence. Emily followed, her face a mix of relief and barely suppressed joy. Her eyes locked on me with a love that made my chest ache. "Henderson!" Catherine called out, her voice crisp and authoritative. A tall, impossibly thin butler materialized from the shadows of the vast marble foyer. His face a mask of professional calm, despite the flicker of horror in his eyes as he took in my grease-stained hands and rumpled suit. "Yes, madam," he replied, his tone a low, respectful murmur. "This is Mr. Jake Thompson," Catherine said, gesturing to me with a flourish. "Please set another place at the table, at my right hand." Henderson's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The seat to the right of the matriarch was the seat of honor, a position I'd later learn even Robert, Emily's father, had coveted for years but never earned. "Of course, madam," Henderson said, recovering quickly, and glided away to carry out her command. Catherine led me through the foyer, her steps brisk and purposeful, as if she were escorting a dignitary rather than a mechanic who'd just been chewed out by her family. The dining room was a spectacle, a long, gleaming table that could seat a small army, adorned with crystal glassware, silver cutlery, and a centerpiece of white roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The table was set for what looked like 20, though only the 5 of us were present. Catherine guided me to the seat of honor, and I sat, feeling like a guy who'd stumbled into a royal court and been mistaken for a prince. Emily took a seat across from me, her eyes sparkling with a mix of pride and disbelief. Robert and Margaret sat further down the table, their faces pale and rigid, like they were attending their own funeral. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a butter knife, but Catherine seemed to thrive on it. She settled into her chair at the head of the table, her posture regal, her smile sharp and knowing. The dinner that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. A performance, a masterclass in power dynamics, with Catherine as the conductor and her family as the unwilling orchestra. She ignored Robert and Margaret completely, her attention laser-focused on me. It wasn't just polite small talk, it was a deliberate, calculated move to elevate me and diminish them in their own home. "So, Jake," she began after Henderson poured us both a glass of deep ruby red wine. "A 1960s Silver Cloud. A magnificent machine, but a notoriously finicky one. The fuel pump, I'm told, is a nightmare. What's the secret to keeping the pressure consistent?" I blinked, caught off guard by her knowledge and genuine interest. But this was my wheelhouse, and her question was like a spark to kindling. I leaned forward, the nervousness melting away as I spoke about my passion. "It's all about balance, ma'am," I said. "The fuel pump on those old Rolls-Royces needs a regular maintenance. Clean the filters, check the diaphragm for wear. Most people overlook the small stuff, but that's what kills a classic. You've got to listen to the engine, feel its rhythm." Catherine nodded, her eyes never leaving mine, her interest palpable. "Fascinating," she said. "My late husband, Edward, was obsessed with those cars. He always said a good mechanic was worth more than a dozen bankers. You seem to prove his point." I felt a flush of pride, but before I could respond, Robert tried to claw his way back into the conversation. "Speaking of investments, Mother," he interjected, his voice a little too loud. "The market for pre-war classics is showing a significant downturn. Perhaps we should—" Catherine cut him off with a wave of her hand, not even glancing his way. "Richard, please," she said, her tone cool and dismissive. "We are discussing things of actual, tangible value tonight, not your imaginary numbers on a screen. Jake is a man who builds things, who fixes things. A concept I fear is becoming quite foreign to this family." The verbal slap was so sharp, so precise, that Robert physically flinched, his face reddening as he retreated into a sullen silence. Margaret, sensing an opportunity, made her own desperate attempt to regain control. "The duck is simply divine, isn't it, Mother?" she said, her voice overly bright. "I had the chef flown in from New York." Catherine took a delicate bite, chewed thoughtfully, then turned to me. "It's quite good," she conceded. "But you know, Jake, a well-tuned engine, an engine that's been cared for and brought back from the brink by a skilled hand, that is a far more satisfying thing than any fancy meal. Don't you agree?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face as I began to understand the game she was playing. "I most certainly do." And so it went. For the entire dinner, Catherine kept the spotlight on me, asking about the intricacies of carburetors, the art of hand-tooling custom parts, the joy of coaxing a forgotten engine back to life. I spoke not as a greasy mechanic, but as an artisan, a craftsman who loved his work. And she listened, her sharp, intelligent eyes drinking in every word, her questions insightful and genuine. Robert and Margaret were reduced to silent spectators, forced to watch as the man they'd tried to humiliate was celebrated in their own dining room. Emily, across the table, was radiant. Her earlier fear had vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered pride. She wasn't just seeing me survive this ordeal. She was seeing me shine, not because I'd pretended to be someone else, but because I was being exactly who I was. At one point, Catherine leaned back, swirling her wine glass. "You know, Jake," she said, "my husband's collection of classic cars has been sitting in a garage on this estate for nearly 20 years. Untouched, neglected, slowly decaying. No one in this family has the skill or the interest to care for them. She paused, her eyes locking onto mine with a glint of something new, something decisive. I believe, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of a royal decree, that I have just found the man for the job. The room went still. Robert's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Margaret's wine glass trembled in her hand. Emily's eyes widened, a spark of hope igniting in them. I felt my own jaw drop, my mind struggling to process what she'd just said. "Ma'am," I stammered. I don't know what to say. That's an incredible honor." "Nonsense," Catherine said with a dismissive wave, though her smile was warm and triumphant. "It's not an honor, Jake. It's a necessity. Those cars are a piece of my husband's legacy, and I won't let them turn to dust because of indifference. You have the skill, the passion, and, most importantly, the character to do them justice. We'll discuss the details tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was deafening, not tense, but electric, filled with the sound of Robert and Margaret's world being turned upside down. They'd tried to cast me out, to prove I didn't belong. And now, their own mother had not only welcomed me, but given me a role in their sacred family legacy. As Henderson served coffee, Catherine made her final move. She looked down the table at her silent, humiliated children, then at Emily and me. "It has been a very long time," she said, her voice quiet but heavy with meaning, "since I've had a conversation of such substance and integrity at this table. It gives an old woman hope for the future of this family." She turned to me, her expression now one of a CEO sealing a deal. "Jake, you'll start with the 1930s Duesenberg. It was Edward's favorite. I expect you'll bring it back to its former glory." Before I could respond, Margaret found her voice, her tone a mix of desperation and outrage. "Mother, you can't be serious," she hissed, leaning forward. "You're giving this mechanic access to Father's collection? It's a priceless piece of our heritage." Catherine turned, and the warm, grandmotherly woman vanished, replaced by a figure of icy authority. "Margaret," she said, her voice like a blade. "Let me be perfectly clear. This family's heritage is not in its cars, its houses, or its stock portfolios. It's supposed to be in its character, a quality Jake has displayed in abundance tonight, and one you and your husband have shown a shocking lack of." She stood, her presence commanding the room. "Jake has my complete confidence. He is a man of skill, decency, and kindness. A welcome addition to this family. You will show him the respect he's earned. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Mother," Margaret whispered, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Robert just nodded, his jaw tight, his pride in tatters. Catherine turned to me, her smile returning. "Henderson will give you the keys to the west garage in the morning, Jake. Have fun." As Emily and I left the dining room, her hand slipped into mine, her touch warm and grounding. We stepped into the cool night air, the Rolls-Royce still parked like a silent sentinel behind my truck. Emily looked at me, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I knew you were amazing," she whispered, "but I didn't know you'd win over her." I laughed, still dazed by the turn of events. "I didn't win her over, Em. I just fixed her car." She shook her head, smiling. "You did more than that. You showed her who you are." As we walked to my truck, I glanced back at the mansion, its windows glowing like a fortress of wealth and power. Robert and Margaret were still inside, licking their wounds, their carefully constructed world shaken to its core. But the real storm was yet to come. Tomorrow, I'd step into that garage, a cathedral of automotive history, and face a challenge that could either cement my place in this family or reignite the war with my in-laws. And something told me Catherine wasn't done turning their world upside down. The next morning, as I stood before the doors of the West Garage, keys in hand, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Robert, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over, Jake. Not by a long shot." What did he mean, and what secrets were waiting for me in that garage? I'd gone from being a grease-stained outcast to the guest of honor in the Bennett mansion, all because I stopped to fix a stranger's Rolls-Royce, who turned out to be Catherine Bennett, the family matriarch. She'd not only saved me from her snobbish son and daughter-in-law, Robert and Margaret, but also handed me the keys to her late husband's priceless car collection. As I stood before the West Garage, ready to step into a gearhead's paradise, I thought I'd won. But then Robert's voice cut through the morning air, low and venomous. "You think you've won, don't you? This isn't over, Jake. Not by a long shot." My stomach dropped. What was he planning, and what was waiting for me behind those garage doors? The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn of the Bennett estate, the air crisp with the promise of fall. Emily stood beside me, her hand squeezing mine, her eyes bright with excitement but tinged with worry. She'd heard her father's words too, and though she tried to hide it, I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Don't let him get to you," she whispered. He's not used to losing." I nodded, forcing a smile, but Robert's threat lingered like exhaust fumes. He wasn't the type to make idle warnings. The man had built a fortune in finance, a world where power plays and calculated moves were second nature. I was a mechanic, not a chess player, but I'd learned one thing from years under the hood. When something's about to break, you can feel it in the vibrations. And right now, the whole estate was humming with trouble. Henderson, the butler, appeared as if summoned by some silent signal, his face as unreadable as ever. He held out a heavy ring of keys, each one gleaming like it had been polished for this moment. "The West Garage, Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Mrs. Bennett has instructed that you have full access. She'll join you shortly to discuss the collection." I took the keys, their weight grounding me. "Thank you, Henderson," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Robert's footsteps crunched on the gravel as he walked away, his back stiff with barely contained rage. Emily gave my hand one last squeeze before heading back to the house to face her parents. I was on my own. The West Garage loomed before me, a low brick building that looked more like a fortress than a storage shed. Its heavy double doors were painted a deep forest green, the brass handles polished to a mirror shine. I slid the key into the lock, my heart pounding like a piston. The door swung open with a soft creak, and I stepped inside, the air cool and heavy with the scent of old leather, motor oil, and history. The sight took my breath away. It wasn't a garage. It was a cathedral of automotive greatness. Rows of cars stretched into the shadows, their chrome trim glinting under the soft glow of overhead lights. A pre-war Bugatti Type 57, its curves like a sculpture. A 1950s Ferrari 250, red as a fresh coat of paint. A hulking 1960s Cadillac Eldorado, its fins sharp enough to cut glass. And there, in the center, was the 1930s Duesenberg Catherine had mentioned. Edward Bennett's favorite, a machine so rare it belonged in a museum. Dust coated their surfaces, a silent testament to years of neglect. But to me, they were alive, waiting to be brought back to their glory. I walked slowly down the aisle, my fingers trailing along the cool metal of a 1940s Packard. This wasn't just a collection. It was a legacy, a love letter to a bygone era of craftsmanship. I could almost hear the engines purring, feel the rumble of their power. For a moment, I forgot about Robert's threat, lost in the beauty of what lay before me. But the moment didn't last. A sharp clack echoed through the garage, and I turned to see Robert standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the morning light. He'd changed out of his tailored jacket into a crisp polo shirt, but the cold disdain in his eyes was the same. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "My father's pride and joy. Worth more than you'll ever earn in your lifetime, Jake." I straightened, wiping my hands on my jeans out of habit, though they were clean for once. "It's incredible," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm honored to be trusted with it." "Honored," he repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. He stepped inside, his polished loafers clicking on the concrete floor. "Let's be clear. My mother may be charmed by your little roadside hero act, but I'm not. You don't belong here. You're a wrench turner, not a curator, and I'm not about to let you waltz in and play with my family's legacy like it's one of your junkyard projects." I felt a spark of anger but kept my cool. "I'm not here to play, Mr. Bennett. I'm here to do a job. One your mother believes I'm qualified for." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Qualified? You? I've already spoken to the estate's lawyer. There's a clause in my father's will about the collection. Only family can oversee it. You're not family, Jake. And if I have my way, you never will be." My stomach twisted. A legal clause? Was he bluffing, or did he have the power to undo everything Catherine had promised? Before I could respond, another voice cut through the tension, strong and unmistakable. "Robert, that's enough." Catherine stepped into the garage, her silver hair catching the light, her expression as unyielding as steel. She was dressed in a tailored blazer and skirt, every inch the matriarch, but her eyes held that same sharp intelligence I'd seen on the roadside. "I see you're wasting no time in embarrassing yourself further." Robert's face flushed, but he held his ground. "Mother, this is absurd. Father's will is clear. The collection is a family matter. This outsider has no right." Catherine raised a hand, silencing him as effortlessly as she had the night before. "Your father's will," she said, her voice icy, "states that the collection is to be maintained by someone with the skill and passion to preserve it. It says nothing about bloodlines, only competence, and from what I've seen, Jake has more of both than anyone in this family." She turned to me, her expression softening. "Jake, walk with me. Let's discuss the Duesenberg." Robert's jaw tightened, but he didn't follow as Catherine led me toward the center of the garage. The Duesenberg gleamed under the lights, its long hood and sweeping fenders a testament to an era when cars were built like art. "This was Edward's pride," she said, her voice softening with memory. "He spent years restoring it himself, but after he passed, no one touched it. It's been silent too long." I nodded, running a hand along the fender, already diagnosing the work it would need. "The carburetor's likely gummed up, and the fuel lines will need flushing. But she's solid. I can bring her back." Catherine smiled, a glint of approval in her eyes. I knew I chose the right man. "Now, tell me, what's the first step?" We spent the next hour deep in conversation, discussing the collection's needs: new gaskets for the Bugatti, a rebuilt transmission for the Ferrari, fresh tires for the Cadillac. It was like talking to a fellow gearhead, not a woman who owned half the county. She listened, asked sharp questions, and shared stories of her husband's love for these machines. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just accepted, but understood. But Robert's words gnawed at me. As Catherine stepped away to take a call, I wandered to the far end of the garage, where a tarp covered something low and sleek. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it back, revealing a 1965 Jaguar E-Type. Its paint faded, but its lines as gorgeous as ever. My heart skipped. This was a car I'd dreamed of working on since I was a kid. But as I leaned closer, I noticed something odd. A small, deliberate scratch along the door, fresh enough to stand out against the dust. It wasn't an accident. Someone had done this on purpose. A chill ran through me. Was this Robert's doing? A petty act of sabotage to undermine me? Or was it a warning of something bigger? I covered the car back up, my mind racing. If Robert was willing to damage a priceless car just to make a point, what else was he capable of? Catherine returned, her expression unreadable. "Everything all right, Jake?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the tarp. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just admiring the E-Type. She's a beauty." "She is," Catherine said, but her tone suggested she'd noticed my unease. "Let's head back to the house. We'll discuss your schedule over lunch." As we left the garage, I glanced back at the Jaguar, its hidden scar burning in my mind. Robert's threat echoed, "This isn't over." I'd stepped into a world of wealth and power, but also of secrets and grudges. The collection was mine to restore, but it came with a price. Robert wasn't just fighting to protect his family's legacy. He was fighting to protect his pride. And I had a sinking feeling he'd do whatever it took to see me fail. That afternoon, as I sat with Catherine and Emily, planning my work on the collection, Henderson appeared, his face pale. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice tight. "There's been an incident in the garage, one of the cars. It's been vandalized." My blood ran cold. Had Robert made his move already? And what would Catherine do when she found out her family's legacy was under attack? I thought I'd won a victory when Catherine Bennett, the matriarch of the family, handed me the keys to her late husband's priceless car collection, turning my humiliating rejection by her snobbish son and daughter-in-law, Robert and Margaret, into a moment of triumph. But standing in the west garage, I'd just uncovered a fresh scratch on a 1965 Jaguar E-Type, a deliberate act that felt like a warning from Robert. His words echoed in my head. "This isn't over, Jake." Now, as I sat with Catherine and Emily, planning my work on the collection, Henderson's voice cut through like a misfiring engine. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his face pale. "There's been an incident in the garage, one of the cars. It's been vandalized." My heart sank. Had Robert escalated his war against me? And what would Catherine do when she learned her family's legacy was under attack? The dining room, where we'd gathered for lunch, was a smaller, less intimidating version of the grand hall from the night before. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off the polished mahogany table where Catherine sat at the head, a notebook open in front of her. Emily sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her eyes warm with pride but flickering with worry after her father's threat that morning. The aroma of fresh-baked bread and herb-roasted chicken filled the air, but Henderson's words turned my stomach to lead. Catherine's sharp blue eyes snapped to the butler, her expression unreadable but commanding. "Explain, Henderson," she said, her voice calm but with an edge that made the room feel colder. Henderson cleared his throat, his usual composure fraying. "It's the Duesenberg, madam. The one you asked Mr. Thompson to prioritize. There's damage, significant damage to the hood and the interior. It appears intentional." Catherine's face didn't change, but her fingers tightened around her pen, the knuckles whitening. Emily gasped softly, her hand squeezing mine under the table. I felt a surge of anger mixed with dread. The Duesenberg, Edward Bennett's favorite, A car worth more than my entire garage business. Vandalized? I thought of the scratch on the Jaguar, hidden under the tarp. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was war. Show me, Catherine said, rising from her chair with the grace of a general heading to battle. She didn't look at me or Emily, but her tone left no room for argument. Jake, Emily, come with me. We followed her out of the house, across the pristine lawn to the west garage. My heart pounded with every step, my mind racing through possibilities. Was this Robert's doing? A desperate attempt to discredit me? Or was there something else going on? Something I hadn't yet grasped about this family and its secrets? The garage doors were already open when we arrived, and Henderson led us straight to the Duesenberg. The sight hit me like a punch. The car's sleek black hood was marred with deep, jagged scratches, as if someone had taken a screwdriver to it in a fit of rage. The leather interior, once a pristine tan, was slashed in multiple places, stuffing spilling out like wounds. My chest tightened. This wasn't just vandalism. It was personal, a deliberate attack on the heart of the collection. Catherine stood silently, her eyes scanning the damage with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. This is no accident, she said finally, her voice low and dangerous. This is an act of spite. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Who would do this? She whispered, but her gaze darted toward the house where her parents were conspicuously absent. I wanted to say it. Robert. His threat, his fury, the scratch on the Jaguar. It all pointed to him, but I held my tongue. Accusing him without proof would only make me look petty, and I wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I knelt beside the Duesenberg, examining the damage. The scratches were deep, but repairable with time and skill. The interior would be trickier. Custom leather like that wasn't easy to source. But I could fix it. I would fix it. Can you restore it, Jake? Catherine asked, her voice cutting through my thoughts. She was watching me closely, not with doubt, but with expectation. Yes, ma'am, I said, standing to meet her gaze. It'll take time. New leather, a full repaint, maybe some custom machining for the trim. But I can bring her back to what she was. Catherine nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Good. I want it done. This car was Edward's pride, and I won't let it be ruined by cowardice. Her words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. She didn't name Robert, but the implication was clear. Emily shifted beside me, her face pale. Grandma, do you think... could it be someone in the family? She asked, her voice trembling. Catherine's expression hardened. I don't speculate, Emily. I deal in facts, and the fact is, someone on this estate has disrespected your grandfather's legacy. I intend to find out who. She turned to Henderson. I want security footage from the garage and the grounds reviewed. Every camera, every angle, and I want a list of everyone who's been on the property in the last 24 hours. Henderson nodded, his face grim. Yes, madam. I'll have it done immediately. As he left, Catherine turned to me, her voice softening but still firm. Jake, you're to start work on the Duesenberg tomorrow. I'll have the necessary funds and resources made available. This collection is your responsibility now, and I trust you to protect it. I swallowed hard, the weight of her trust settling on my shoulders. I won't let you down, ma'am. She gave me a small, approving nod, then turned to leave. But before she did, she paused, her eyes flicking to Emily. Stay with him, dear. He's going to need you. Emily and I were left alone in the garage, the damaged Duesenberg looming like a crime scene. She wrapped her arms around me, her head resting against my chest. I'm so sorry, Jake, she whispered. I didn't think my dad would... I know he's upset, but this... I held her close, my mind still on the Jaguar's scratch. "We don't know it was him," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "But whoever did this, they're trying to send a message. I'm not going anywhere, Em. I'm going to fix this car, and I'm going to prove I belong here." She pulled back, her eyes shining with determination. "I know you will, and I'm with you, every step." The rest of the day was a blur of planning. Catherine's staff delivered a stack of catalogs for rare auto parts, and I spent hours on the phone with suppliers, tracking down the exact leather and paint needed for the Duesenberg. But the whole time, Robert's threat and the vandalism gnawed at me. If he was behind this, what was his endgame? To scare me off? To discredit me in front of Catherine? Or was there something deeper, some secret about the collection he didn't want me to uncover? That evening, Emily and I sat on the porch of the guest cottage where I was staying, the estate's lights twinkling in the distance. The air was cool, and she leaned against me, her warmth a comfort against the uncertainty. "Do you think Grandma suspects Dad?" she asked quietly. "I think she suspects everyone," I said, staring out at the darkening lawn. "She's sharp, Em. She's not going to let this slide." Emily nodded, but her brow furrowed. "There's something you should know. Dad's always been protective of the collection, even though he doesn't care about cars. It's like he sees it as his inheritance, his status. If Grandma's giving you control, he might feel like he's losing more than just the cars." I frowned, piecing it together. "You think he'd go this far to keep me out?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but he's not used to being challenged, especially not in his own house." Before I could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Henderson, his face even graver than before. "Mr. Thompson, Miss Emily?" he said, his voice low. "Mrs. Bennett requests your presence in the study. She's reviewed the security footage." My pulse quickened. Emily and I exchanged a glance, then followed Henderson back to the main house. The study was a wood-paneled room lined with bookshelves, a fire crackling in the hearth. Catherine sat behind a massive desk, a laptop open in front of her. Robert and Margaret stood nearby, their faces tight with unease. The air was thick with tension, like the moment before a spark plug fires. "Jake, Emily," Catherine said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "I've found something troubling. The footage shows a figure entering the garage last night, just after midnight. They were careful to avoid the main cameras, but one angle caught them." She turned the laptop toward us. The grainy image showed a shadowy figure in a hooded jacket, moving quickly toward the Duesenberg. My heart sank as I recognized the build, the way they moved. It was Robert. But before I could say anything, Catherine's next words froze me in place. "The figure wasn't alone," she said, her eyes narrowing. "There's someone else involved, someone who's been on this estate longer than you, Jake. And I want to know why." As Catherine replayed the footage, a second figure appeared, their face obscured but their presence unmistakable. Who was Robert's accomplice, and what were they hiding about the collection? Was this just about keeping me out, or was there a darker secret buried in the Bennett family's legacy? I was standing in the Bennett family's study, my heart pounding as Catherine, the iron-willed matriarch, showed us grainy security footage of a hooded figure vandalizing the priceless Duesenberg in the West Garage. The figure was unmistakably Robert, my girlfriend Emily's father, who'd made it clear he wanted me gone. But Catherine's next words hit like a thrown wrench. "The figure wasn't alone. There's someone else involved. Someone who's been on this estate longer than you, Jake." As the laptop screen flickered, revealing a second shadowy figure, my mind raced. Who was Robert's accomplice, and what were they hiding about the Bennett family's car collection? Was this just about keeping a grease-stained mechanic like me out? Or was there a darker secret buried in their legacy? The fire in the study's hearth crackled, casting long shadows across the room. Catherine sat behind her massive desk, her face a mask of controlled fury, her pale blue eyes locked on the laptop screen. Emily stood beside me, her hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel her pulse racing. Robert and Margaret, positioned near the bookshelves, looked like cornered animals. Robert's jaw was clenched, his eyes darting, while Margaret's perfectly manicured hands twisted nervously in her lap. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and I felt like I'd walked into a courtroom where I was both witness and suspect. Catherine zoomed in on the footage, the grainy image sharpening just enough to show the second figure. They were shorter than Robert, their movements quick and furtive, but their face was hidden by a hood. "This person," Catherine said, her voice low and deliberate, "knew exactly where the cameras were. They stayed in the shadows, avoided the main angles, but they didn't know about the secondary camera by the west door." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering on Robert and Margaret before settling on me. "Jake, you were in the garage this morning. Did you see anything unusual? Anything that might point to who this second person is?" I hesitated, the image of the scratched Jaguar E-Type flashing in my mind. I hadn't told anyone about it yet, not even Emily. Part of me wanted to blurt it out, to point the finger at Robert and demand answers, but I knew better than to play my hand too soon. "There was a scratch on the Jaguar," I said carefully, watching Robert's reaction. "Fresh, deliberate. I didn't think much of it at first, but after this..." I gestured to the laptop. "It's starting to feel like a pattern." Robert's face twitched, a flicker of something, guilt, maybe, or panic, crossing his features before he smoothed it away. "A scratch?" he said, his voice dripping with forced skepticism. "You're accusing someone based on a scratch? Those cars have been sitting there for years. It could have happened any time." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Robert, the Duesenberg was vandalized last night, under your roof, and you were there." She tapped the laptop screen, where his hooded figure was frozen mid-motion, a screwdriver glinting in his hand. "I wasn't..." Robert started, but Margaret cut him off, her voice shrill and desperate. "Mother, this is ridiculous! You can't seriously believe Robert would damage Father's cars. He's devoted to this family, to its legacy." Her words were fervent, but her eyes were wide with fear, like she was trying to convince herself as much as Catherine. Catherine leaned back in her chair, her expression unyielding. "I believe what the evidence shows, Margaret. And right now, it shows your husband sneaking into my garage in the middle of the night, defacing a car worth more than your precious stock portfolio. What I want to know is why. And who was with him?" Emily's grip on my hand tightened, and she stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Dad, just tell her the truth. If you did this, why? What's so important about keeping Jake out that you'd ruin Grandpa's car?" Robert's face reddened, his composure cracking. "This isn't about Jake," he snapped, then caught himself lowering his voice. "This is about protecting what's ours. Mother, you can't just hand over Father's collection to a stranger, a mechanic who doesn't understand its value. It's not just cars. It's our family's history." Catherine's laugh was sharp, cutting through his words like a blade. "History? You've never so much as touched a wrench, Robert. You see those cars as assets to be sold off or bragged about at your country club. Jake sees them for what they are, works of art, pieces of your father's soul. And he's proven he's willing to protect them, unlike you." The room fell silent, Robert's face a mask of humiliated rage. I could feel the weight of his resentment, but something else was nagging at me. The second figure. Who were they? Why would Robert need an accomplice? This wasn't just about pride or snobbery. There was something deeper, something tied to the collection itself. Catherine closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "Henderson," she called, and the butler appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting just outside the door. "I want a full inventory of the collection by tomorrow morning. Every car, every part, every document related to Edward's acquisitions. And I want the garage locked down. No one enters without my permission, except Jake." Henderson nodded. "Yes, madam." "And Robert," Catherine added, her voice cold as steel. "You will stay away from the garage until I say otherwise. If I find one more scratch, one more slashed seat, I'll have you answering to more than just me." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but one look from Catherine silenced him. He stormed out, Margaret trailing behind, her heels clicking furiously on the hardwood floor. Emily let out a shaky breath, her eyes meeting mine. "This is getting out of hand," she whispered. "What if Dad's not just angry? What if he's desperate?" I didn't have an answer, but her words sent a chill down my spine. Desperation made people dangerous, and Robert was already on edge. I pulled her close, trying to reassure her and myself. "We'll figure it out, Em. Your grandma's on our side, and I'm not letting anyone ruin this." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest cottage, staring at the ceiling, replaying the footage in my mind. The second figure's movements were too deliberate, too practiced. They weren't just some hired thug. They knew the estate, the cameras, the cars. My thoughts kept circling back to something Emily had said. Robert saw the collection as his inheritance, his status. What if there was more to it than that? What if the collection held a secret he was willing to destroy it to protect? The next morning, I was back in the garage at dawn, determined to start on the Duesenberg despite the tension hanging over the estate. The car's damage looked even worse in the daylight, but I could see the path to restoration. Sand down the scratches, source new leather, rebuild the trim. I was sketching out a plan when Henderson appeared, a thick leather-bound folder in his hands. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice low. "Mrs. Bennett asked me to deliver this. It's the documentation for the collection. Purchase records, maintenance logs, Edward's personal notes." I took the folder, its weight surprising me. "Thanks, Henderson. Anything I should know?" He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the house. "Mr. Bennett, Edward, was very particular about his cars. He kept detailed records, but some of them, they're incomplete. There's a rumor among the staff that one of the cars, the Duesenberg, was more than just a car to him. Something valuable was tied to it." My pulse quickened. "Valuable how?" Henderson shook his head. "I don't know, sir. But Mr. Robert has been asking about the Duesenberg for years, long before you arrived. Be careful." He left me alone with the folder, my mind buzzing. I opened it, flipping through yellowed pages of Edward's meticulous handwriting. Notes on engine specs, paint formulas, and restoration tips. But near the back, tucked between two receipts, was something odd. A handwritten letter, sealed with wax, addressed to Catherine. The wax was unbroken, as if she'd never seen it. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the seal. Opening it felt like crossing a line, but the vandalism, Robert's threat, and the mysterious second figure pushed me forward. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Edward's handwriting was steady, but the words were heavy with urgency. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And the Duesenberg holds the key to what I couldn't tell you. It's not just a car, it's a vault. Check the compartment under the rear seat. Forgive me for keeping this from you, but I had to protect you and the family. My breath caught. A vault? I glanced at the Duesenberg, its slashed interior suddenly taking on new meaning. Had Robert known about this? Was that why he'd targeted it? I needed to check that compartment, but with the garage under lockdown and Catherine's orders, I couldn't do it alone. I found Emily in the garden, her face pale as she read my expression. "Jake, what's wrong?" I showed her the letter, keeping my voice low. "Your grandpa hid something in the Duesenberg. Something big? I think your dad knows, and he's willing to destroy the car to keep it hidden." Her eyes widened, fear mixing with determination. "Then we need to find it first. Tonight, when everyone's asleep." As night fell over the Bennett estate, Emily and I crept into the locked garage, the Duesenberg waiting like a silent sentinel. But as we reached for the rear seat, a beam of light swept across the windows, and footsteps echoed outside. Someone was coming, and they weren't alone. Had Robert figured out our plan? Or was the second figure about to reveal themselves? The Bennett estate was a powder keg, and I was holding a match. After discovering Edward Bennett's hidden letter about a secret vault in the Duesenberg, I knew the vandalism of the car collection wasn't just Robert's attempt to push me out. It was about protecting a family secret. Emily and I had crept into the locked west garage under cover of night, determined to uncover what her grandfather had hidden beneath the Duesenberg's rear seat. But as our fingers brushed the slashed leather, a beam of light swept across the windows, and heavy footsteps echoed outside. Someone was coming, and they weren't alone. Had Robert caught us? Or was the mysterious second figure from the security footage about to reveal themselves? The garage was dark, save for the faint glow of a single overhead light casting long shadows across the rows of classic cars. The air was thick with the familiar scent of oil and aged metal, but tonight it felt heavy, oppressive, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Emily crouched beside me, her eyes wide with fear, but burning with resolve. Her hand trembled as she gripped a small flashlight, its beam trained on the Duesenberg's torn interior. My heart pounded like a misfiring engine, every nerve on edge as the footsteps grew louder, crunching on the gravel just outside the garage doors. "Jake?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do we do?" I pressed a finger to my lips, motioning for her to stay low. The Duesenberg's rear seat was already partially dismantled from the vandalism, the leather slashed and stuffing exposed. I reached inside, feeling for the compartment Edward's letter had mentioned. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a hidden latch, cleverly disguised beneath the seat frame. But before I could pull it, the garage door rattled, the sound of a key scraping in the lock freezing us in place. "Hide!" I hissed, pulling Emily behind the Bugatti parked next to the Duesenberg. We ducked low, the car's sleek curves shielding us from view. The door creaked open, and two figures stepped inside, their silhouettes outlined by the moonlight streaming through the windows. One was unmistakably Robert. His tall, rigid frame and deliberate stride gave him away. The other was shorter, their face still hidden by a hood, just like in the security footage. "We don't have much time," Robert muttered, his voice low and urgent. "She's getting too close. If she finds it before we do, everything's ruined." The second figure's voice was muffled, but I caught a faint, familiar cadence. "You said this would be simple, Robert. You said he'd be gone by now. Now we've got a mess, and Catherine's watching us like a hawk." Emily's hand tightened on my arm, her breath catching. She recognized the voice too, but neither of us could place it. Not yet. My mind raced. Whoever this was, they were in deep with Robert, and they were terrified of Catherine. But what were they looking for? The same thing we were? Robert moved toward the Duesenberg, his flashlight beam sweeping over the car. "It's got to be here," he said, his tone edged with desperation. He wouldn't have hidden it anywhere else. The letter said the rear seat, didn't it? The second figure hesitated. "You're sure you saw him open the letter? If Jake knows?" "He doesn't know anything," Robert snapped. "He's a grease monkey, not a detective. But we need to move fast. If Mother gets her hands on it, she'll ruin us." My blood ran cold. They knew about the letter. Had Robert been watching me in the garage, or had someone else tipped him off? I glanced at Emily, her face pale but determined. We were so close to the truth, but if they found the compartment first, whatever Edward had hidden would be gone, and with it, any chance of proving Robert's sabotage. I leaned closer to Emily, whispering in her ear. "We need to distract them. Can you make a noise, something small, over by the Ferrari?" She nodded, her jaw set. She crept silently toward the far side of the garage, her flashlight off. A moment later, a soft clatter echoed. A wrench she'd knocked over, rolling across the concrete floor. Robert and his accomplice froze, their flashlights swinging toward the sound. "Who's there?" Robert barked, his voice sharp with paranoia. He moved toward the Ferrari, the second figure trailing behind, their hood still obscuring their face. This was our chance. I slid back to the Duesenberg, my hands moving quickly but carefully. The latch clicked softly under my fingers, and a small panel popped open beneath the rear seat. Inside was a metal box, no bigger than a cigar case, its surface etched with the initials EB. My heart raced as I lifted it out, tucking it into my jacket just as Robert's flashlight beam swung back toward the Duesenberg. "Show yourself!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast garage. I ducked low, my pulse hammering, and crawled back to the Bugatti where Emily was already waiting, her eyes wide with fear and excitement. "Did you get it?" she whispered. I nodded, patting my jacket. "Let's get out of here." We slipped toward the side door, moving as quietly as we could. But just as we reached it, the second figure's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "They're here! Robert, the side door!" My stomach dropped. The voice, it was Margaret, Emily's mother, Robert's wife, the woman who'd sneered at my grease-stained hands and called me rustic. She was the second figure, his accomplice in the vandalism. Emily froze, her face a mask of shock and betrayal, but there was no time to process it. The main garage doors were still locked, and Robert and Margaret were closing in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. "Run!" I said, grabbing Emily's hand. We bolted through the side door, bursting into the cool night air. The gravel crunched under our feet as we sprinted across the lawn toward the guest cottage, the metal box heavy in my jacket. Behind us, Robert shouted, his voice thick with rage. "Stop them! They've got it!" We reached the cottage, slamming the door behind us and locking it. Emily was shaking, her eyes filled with tears. "My mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. How could they do this?" I pulled her into my arms, my own heart racing. "I don't know, Em, but we've got the box. Whatever's in it, it's what they're afraid of." We sat on the floor, the box between us. It was locked, a small keyhole glinting in the dim light of the cottage's lamp. "We need to open it," Emily said, her voice steadying. "But we can't do it here. They'll come looking." She was right. Robert and Margaret knew we had the box, and they weren't going to stop. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see their flashlights closing in. "We need to get to your grandma," I said. She's the only one who can protect us, and whatever's in this box. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. There's a back path to the main house. We can avoid the lawn. We slipped out the cottage's rear door, moving through the shadows of the estate's sprawling gardens. The night was quiet, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and our own ragged breathing. The box felt like a live grenade in my hands, its contents a mystery that could either save us or destroy everything. What had Edward hidden? Was it money, documents, proof of some scandal? And why were Robert and Margaret so desperate to keep it buried? We reached the main house, slipping through a side entrance near the kitchen. The halls were dark, the staff long gone for the night. We made our way to Catherine's study, praying she was still awake. I knocked softly, my heart in my throat. After a moment, the door opened, and Catherine stood there, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, a silk robe replacing her usual tailored attire. Her eyes flicked from our faces to the box in my hands, and a spark of understanding lit her gaze. "You found it?" she said, her voice low but steady. She stepped aside, letting us in. "Show me." I set the box on her desk, explaining everything: the letter, the compartment, Robert and Margaret's pursuit. Catherine listened silently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she picked up the box, her fingers tracing the etched initials. "Edward always had his secrets," she murmured. "But I never thought they'd tear this family apart." She pulled a small key from a drawer, her hands steady as she unlocked the box. Inside was a single item: a leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed with age. Catherine opened it, her eyes scanning the first page, and her face paled. "My God," she whispered. "It's worse than I thought." As Catherine flipped through the notebook, her hands trembling, a loud knock echoed at the study door. Robert's voice boomed from the other side. "Mother, open the door. We need to talk. Now!" Had he and Margaret tracked us down, ready to take the box by force? And what secret in Edward's notebook was so explosive it could unravel the Bennet family? My heart was racing as Emily and I stood in Catherine Bennet's study, the locked metal box from the Duesenberg, revealing a leather-bound notebook that made the matriarch's face pale with shock. Whatever secrets Edward Bennet had hidden, they were big enough to drive Robert and Margaret to vandalize their own family's legacy. But before Catherine could explain, a loud knock shook the study door, and Robert's voice boomed through the wood. "Mother, open the door! We need to talk! Now!" Had he and Margaret tracked us down to seize the notebook? And what was written in those yellowed pages that could unravel the entire Bennet family? The study's fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the bookshelves and Catherine's desk. Emily clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear, her breath shallow. I could feel the weight of the notebook's secrets in the air, heavy as the scent of old leather and ink. Catherine held the notebook, her fingers trembling slightly, a rare crack in her ironclad composure. She didn't look up as Robert pounded on the door again, his voice sharper now, laced with desperation. "Mother, this is serious! Let us in!" Catherine's eyes flicked to the door, then back to us. "Stay calm," she said, her voice low and steady, but there was an edge to it, like a blade being unsheathed. She slipped the notebook into her robe's pocket and moved to the desk, pressing a small button hidden beneath its edge. A soft click sounded, and I realized she'd locked the door from the inside, a precaution I hadn't expected. "Jake, Emily," she said, turning to us. "Whatever happens, you stay behind me. This family's secrets have been buried long enough." Emily nodded, her face pale but resolute. I stepped closer to her, my hand resting protectively on her shoulder. The pounding grew louder, joined by Margaret's voice, high and frantic. "Mother, please, you don't understand what's at stake." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line, and she strode to the door, her silk robe swishing like a battle flag. She didn't open it, but stood tall, her voice carrying through the wood with chilling authority. "Robert, Margaret, you will stop this nonsense immediately. I know what you've done to the Duesenberg, and I know you're after Edward's notebook. If you have any sense, you'll explain yourselves now, before I call the authorities." The pounding stopped, replaced by a tense silence. I could almost feel Robert and Margaret exchanging panicked glances on the other side. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "Mother, you're making a mistake. That notebook, it's dangerous. Father wasn't who you thought he was. Let us in, and we'll explain." Catherine's eyes narrowed, but she didn't budge. "Dangerous?" she repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "The only danger here is your betrayal of this family's trust. You've defaced Edward's legacy, and now you're chasing secrets you clearly don't understand. Speak plainly, Robert, or leave." Emily's hand tightened on mine, her voice a whisper. "Jake, what's in that notebook? Why are they so scared?" "I don't know," I murmured, my mind racing. The letter had called the Duesenberg a vault, and the notebook was its key. Was it money? A will? Evidence of some scandal? Whatever it was, Robert and Margaret were willing to risk everything to keep it hidden. Catherine turned back to us, pulling the notebook from her pocket. She opened it again, her eyes scanning the pages as if searching for answers. "Edward was a private man," she said softly, almost to herself. "But he never kept secrets from me, or so I thought." She flipped to a page near the middle, her breath catching. This changes everything." Before she could explain, the door rattled again, this time with a sharper, more deliberate force. "Mother, open the door!" Margaret's voice was a shriek now, all pretense of composure gone. "You can't trust him. Jake's not one of us. He'll ruin everything." I felt a surge of anger, but Catherine's hand shot up, silencing any response I might have made. She moved to the desk, grabbing a letter opener that looked sharp enough to do real damage. "Enough!" she snapped, her voice like a whip. "If you force this door, you'll regret it. Henderson!" The butler appeared instantly, his face grim but steady. "Yes, madam?" "Call security," Catherine ordered, "and have them escort my son and daughter-in-law to their quarters. They're not to leave until I say so." Henderson nodded and vanished, his footsteps quick and purposeful. I heard Robert curse under his breath, followed by the sound of retreating steps. But I didn't relax. Something told me this wasn't over. Robert and Margaret were desperate, and desperate people don't give up easily. Catherine turned back to the notebook, her expression a mix of sorrow and determination. "Jake, Emily," she said, "sit down. You need to hear this." We sat on the leather couch by the fire, Emily's hand still in mine. Catherine stood, holding the notebook like it was a sacred relic. "This isn't just a record of Edward's cars," she said. "It's a confession. Years ago, before we built this estate, Edward made a deal he regretted until the day he died." She opened the notebook to a page filled with Edward's tight, meticulous handwriting. "He was involved with some unsavory people," she continued, her voice steady but heavy with pain. "Businessmen, collectors, men with more money than morals. They wanted the Duesenberg, not for its beauty, but because it was a perfect hiding place. Edward modified it himself, built a compartment to smuggle rare gems across borders. It was a one-time deal, meant to secure our future, but it haunted him." Emily's eyes widened, her voice barely a whisper. Grandpa was a smuggler? Catherine shook her head. Not in the way you think. He was young, desperate to prove himself. He regretted it, but the gems? They're still in the Duesenberg. He couldn't bring himself to sell them, and he hid the truth to protect me, to protect all of us. I leaned forward, my mind reeling. The compartment under the rear seat, I said. That's what Robert and Margaret were after. They knew about the gems. Catherine nodded grimly. Robert's been obsessed with the collection's value for years. I thought it was just greed, but this... She tapped the notebook. He must have found out about the gems, maybe through Edward's old contacts. He and Margaret wanted to sell them, to cash in on a fortune they think belongs to them. Emily's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. How could they do this? Lie to Grandma? Destroy Grandpa's car? For money? It's not just money, Catherine said, her voice hardening. It's power, control. They think they can dictate this family's future, but they're wrong. I thought of the box, the slashed Duesenberg, Robert's threat in the garage. What do we do now? I asked. If the gems are still there, they'll come for them again. Catherine closed the notebook, her jaw set. We protect the collection and the truth. Jake, you're going to repair the Duesenberg, just as we planned. But first, we're going to retrieve those gems. I won't let them fall into the wrong hands. She handed me a small key, the same one she'd used to open the box. Tomorrow morning, you and I will go to the garage. We'll open the compartment together. If the gems are there, I'll decide what to do with them. Until then, this stays between us. Emily nodded, wiping her tears. What about Mom and Dad? They're not going to stop. Catherine's eyes glinted with a fierce resolve. Leave them to me. They've underestimated me for the last time. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the weight of the key in my pocket, like a lead weight. Emily was still asleep in the guest cottage, her face peaceful despite the chaos of the night before. I slipped out quietly, meeting Catherine at the garage as the first rays of sunlight broke over the estate. The Duesenberg stood silent, its wounds a stark reminder of the battle we were fighting. Catherine inserted the key into the compartment's lock, her hands steady. The panel clicked open, revealing a velvet pouch nestled inside. She lifted it out, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were a dozen gems, diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, each one catching the light like a tiny star. They were worth a fortune, but to Catherine, they were a symbol of her husband's guilt. We'll donate them, she said firmly, to a museum, a charity, somewhere they can't hurt this family anymore. But as we turned to leave, a shadow moved in the doorway. Margaret stood there, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. You can't do this, Mother, she said, her voice shaking. Those gems are ours, our future. You're throwing it away. Catherine stepped forward, the pouch clutched in her hand. Your future is this family, Margaret, not some stolen treasure. Step aside or you'll lose more than you can imagine. Margaret hesitated, her gaze flicking to me. For a moment, I thought she'd lunge for the pouch. But then another figure appeared behind her, Robert, his face dark with fury, and someone else, someone I hadn't expected. The third figure stepped into the light, their face finally clear, and my heart stopped. It was Henderson, the butler, his calm demeanor replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Give us the gems, Mrs. Bennet, he said, his voice chillingly unfamiliar. Or this ends badly for everyone. What was Henderson's role in this, and how deep did the betrayal run? The West Garage felt like a battlefield as Catherine clutched the velvet pouch of priceless gems, the secret hidden in her late husband, Edward Duesenberg. Emily and I had uncovered the truth, but Robert and Margaret, desperate to claim the fortune, stood in our way. Then, the final blow. Henderson, the loyal butler, stepped into the light, his calm demeanor gone, replaced by a cold, menacing stare. "Give us the gems, Mrs. Bennet," he said, his voice chillingly unfamiliar, "or this ends badly for everyone." My heart stopped. Henderson was part of this? How deep did this betrayal run, and what did it mean for the Bennet family's legacy? The early morning light filtered through the garage's high windows, casting stark shadows across the Duesenberg's scarred hood. Catherine stood firm, the pouch of gems, diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, gripped tightly in her hand, their glow a silent accusation. Emily was beside me, her face pale with shock, her eyes locked on Henderson as if seeing him for the first time. Robert and Margaret stood just behind him, their expressions a mix of triumph and desperation. But it was Henderson's betrayal that hit hardest. The man who'd served the Bennets for decades, who'd carried out Catherine's orders with quiet efficiency, was now staring her down like a predator. "Explain yourself, Henderson," Catherine said, her voice steady but laced with a fury I hadn't heard before. "You've been with this family for 30 years. Why throw it all away now?" Henderson's lips curled into a thin, bitter smile, a stark contrast to his usual neutral mask. 30 years of bowing and scraping, Mrs. Bennet," he said, his voice low and venomous. 30 years of watching your family squander wealth while I fetched your coffee and polished your silver. Edward promised me a cut of those gems, a reward for my loyalty. He said they'd set me up for life, but he died, and you locked them away in that car." Catherine's eyes narrowed, but her grip on the pouch didn't waver. "Edward would never have made such a promise. You're lying." "Am I?" Henderson stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete floor. "He told me about the deal, how he smuggled those gems to secure your empire. I helped him hide them, modify the Duesenberg. I was supposed to get my share, but you buried his secret along with him." Robert shifted, his face tightening. "Mother, he's telling the truth. Father told me about the gems years ago, said they were our insurance policy. Henderson came to us when you gave Jake the collection. We couldn't let an outsider take what's ours." Emily's voice broke through, sharp with disbelief. "Dad, you're working with him? You trusted Henderson over Grandma? Over me?" Robert's jaw clenched, but Margaret spoke up, her voice shrill. "You don't understand, Emily. Those gems are worth millions, enough to secure our future, your future. Jake doesn't belong here. He's a nobody who'll sell them off or ruin everything." I felt a surge of anger, but Catherine's hand shot up, silencing the room. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "You've all disgraced this family. Edward's mistake was his alone, and he paid for it with his guilt. These gems are not your birthright. They're a curse, and I won't let you destroy his legacy for them." Henderson laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Legacy? Your husband was a smuggler, Mrs. Bennet. His legacy is a lie. Hand over the pouch, or I'll take it." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, gleaming pistol. Emily gasped, stepping back, and my heart lurched. I moved in front of her instinctively, my hands raised. "Whoa, Henderson, let's not do anything stupid," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. "You don't need to hurt anyone." Catherine didn't flinch, her eyes locked on Henderson's. "You think a gun will make me bend? You've forgotten who I am." The air was electric, every second stretching like a taut wire. I glanced at the Duesenberg, its open compartment a silent witness to the chaos. My mind raced. Henderson was the key, the one who'd known about the gems all along. He'd manipulated Robert and Margaret, played on their greed to get what he wanted. But he wasn't a thug. He was a planner, a man who'd waited decades for his moment. And now, that moment was slipping away. "Jake," Catherine said, her voice calm but urgent. "The toolbox by the workbench. There's a wrench inside. Get it." Henderson's eyes flicked to me, the gun steady in his hand. "Don't move, mechanic," he snapped. "This doesn't concern you." But I was already moving, slow and deliberate, my hands still raised. "Just grabbing a tool, Henderson," I said, keeping my tone casual. "You know me. Can't resist fixing things." Robert lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Don't play hero, Jake. You're out of your depth." I twisted free, using a move I'd learned breaking up bar fights back in my garage days. Robert stumbled, and I reached the workbench, snatching the heavy wrench from the toolbox. It wasn't a gun, but it was solid, reassuring in my hand. "Back off, Robert," I said, stepping between him and Emily. "This ends now." Henderson's gun wavered, his eyes darting between me and Catherine. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, but there was a crack in his voice, a hint of doubt. Catherine seized the moment, stepping forward, the pouch still in her hand. "You've lost, Henderson. You think you can intimidate me in my own home? Security's already on their way. Put the gun down, or you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell." As if on cue, the distant sound of boots on gravel echoed outside, growing closer. Henderson's face paled, his grip on the gun tightening. Margaret let out a sob, clutching Robert's arm. "Do something," she hissed. "We can't lose everything." But Robert looked defeated, his shoulders slumping. "It's over, Margaret," he muttered. "She's won." Henderson's eyes blazed with desperation. "No," he growled, raising the gun higher. "I've waited too long for this." Before he could act, the garage doors burst open and 2 security guards stormed in, their own weapons drawn. "Drop it!" one shouted, his voice booming. Henderson froze, his hand shaking, then slowly lowered the gun, letting it clatter to the floor. The guards were on him in seconds, pinning his arms and dragging him away. Catherine turned to Robert and Margaret, her expression colder than the steel in my hand. "You two," she said, "will answer for this. Betraying your family, conspiring with that man, it's unforgivable." Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing, while Robert just stared at the floor, his pride shattered. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "Grandma, what happens now? The gems? The notebook? What does it mean for us?" Catherine sighed, her face softening as she looked at her granddaughter. "It means we face the truth, Emily. Edward made mistakes, but he loved this family. Those gems will be donated, anonymously, to a museum, to honor his memory without staining it. And you, Jake," she turned to me, her eyes warm with respect. "You'll restore the collection, starting with the Duesenberg. This family needs someone with your integrity." I nodded, the wrench still heavy in my hand. "I'll do it, ma'am. For Edward and for you." The guards returned, confirming Henderson was in custody and awaiting the police. Catherine handed me the pouch of gems, her trust in me absolute. "Keep these safe until I arrange the donation," she said. "And Jake, watch your back. This family has more secrets than I'd like to admit." As Emily and I left the garage, the morning sun now high, the weight of the past few days settled over me. We'd uncovered Edward's secret, exposed Henderson's betrayal, and humbled Robert and Margaret. But Catherine's words echoed. More secrets. What else was hidden in this family, and would restoring the collection bring them to light? Emily squeezed my hand, her smile faint but genuine. "You did it, Jake. You stood up to all of them?" I shook my head, pulling her close. We did it, Em, and we're not done yet. That afternoon, as I began work on the Duesenberg, I found another hidden compartment, this one in the trunk, sealed with a lock that didn't match any key we had. Inside was a single photograph, old and faded, showing Edward with a man I didn't recognize, standing in front of the Duesenberg. On the back, in Edward's handwriting, were the words, "The debt is still owed." What new secret had I stumbled into, and who was coming to collect? The West Garage was a trap, and I'd walked right into it. Victor Russo, the ghost from Edward Bennett's past, stood in the doorway, his fedora casting a shadow over his predatory smile. The glint of a knife in his hand matched the menace in his voice. "Hand over the gems, kid, or I'll make sure you and your pretty girlfriend never see another sunrise." My heart pounded, the wrench in my grip feeling woefully inadequate. The pouch of gems was locked away in Catherine's safe, but Victor didn't know that, and I had to keep it that way. Could I outsmart a man who'd waited decades for his prize? Or was this the end of the line for me and Emily? The garage's dim light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the Duesenberg's half-repaired hood. The air was thick with the scent of paint and motor oil, but all I could focus on was Victor's knife, its blade catching the light as he stepped closer. His eyes were cold, calculating, like a man who'd played this game before and always won. My mind raced, searching for an angle, a way to stall him. The security guards Catherine had assigned were patrolling the estate's perimeter, too far to hear me shout. Emily was back at the guest cottage, safe for now, but Victor's threat against her burned in my chest. "Easy, Mr. Russo," I said, keeping my voice steady, the wrench raised like a shield. "The gems aren't here. They're with Catherine, locked up tight. You're not getting them tonight." Victor's smirk widened, but his eyes narrowed, assessing me. "You're a lousy liar, kid. I know you found that compartment in the Duesenberg. Hand over the pouch, and maybe I let you walk away." I took a slow step back, my free hand brushing the workbench behind me, fingers searching for anything useful, a screwdriver, a hammer, anything to even the odds. "You're late to the party," I said, forcing a grin. "We found the gems days ago. They're out of reach, and the police are already on to you, thanks to Henderson." His smile faltered, just for a second, and I saw a flicker of doubt. Henderson's arrest had shaken him. He hadn't expected the butler to crack so fast. "Henderson was a fool," Victor spat, his grip on the knife tightening. "But I'm not. I've waited 30 years for this. You think I'm scared of a few cops?" He lunged, faster than I expected for a man his age, the knife flashing toward my side. I swung the wrench, catching his wrist with a dull thud. He hissed, stumbling back, but didn't drop the blade. I used the moment to dart behind the Duesenberg, putting the car's bulk between us. My heart hammered, but my mind was clear. This was my turf, my garage. I knew every inch of it. "Big mistake, Russo," I said, circling the car, keeping him moving. "You're in my world now. You know how many ways a garage like this can end a fight?" He laughed, a low, guttural sound, and came at me again, this time feinting left before slashing right. I ducked, the blade whistling over my head, and grabbed a heavy socket wrench from the floor. I hurled it at his legs, aiming for his knees. It connected with a crack, and he staggered, cursing, giving me a split second to sprint toward the workbench. My fingers closed around a can of spray paint, half empty, but enough. I spun, aiming the nozzle at his face, and pressed the trigger. A cloud of black paint erupted, catching him in the eyes. He roared, clawing at his face, the knife clattering to the concrete. I didn't hesitate. I tackled him, driving him to the ground, my knee pinning his chest. "Stay down!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the garage. But Victor was tougher than he looked. He bucked, nearly throwing me off, his paint-streaked face twisted with rage. I grabbed his wrists, slamming them against the floor, but he was strong, fueled by decades of resentment. The side door burst open, and Emily's voice cut through the chaos. "Jake!" She stood there, wide-eyed, a flashlight in one hand and a phone in the other, already dialing. "Security's coming!" Victor's eyes locked on her, and for a moment, I thought he'd break free, driven by pure desperation. But the sound of boots on gravel, security finally, stopped him cold. He went limp beneath me, his breath ragged, the fight draining out of him. 2 guards stormed in, weapons drawn, pulling me off Victor and cuffing him in seconds. Emily ran to me, throwing her arms around me, her voice trembling. "Are you okay? I heard the shouting from the cottage. I thought—" "I'm fine," I said, holding her close, my own adrenaline still spiking. "He didn't get the gems." Victor glared up at us from the floor, his face smeared with paint, his eyes burning with defeat. "You think this is over?" he rasped. "Edward's debt isn't paid. There are others who'll come for what's mine." The guards hauled him up, dragging him toward the door, but his words lingered like exhaust fumes. Others? What did that mean? I looked at Emily, her face pale but resolute, and knew we weren't out of the woods yet. Catherine arrived minutes later, her silk scarf fluttering as she strode into the garage, her eyes taking in the scene. Victor in cuffs, the spilled paint, the wrench on the floor. "Well done, Jake," she said, her voice warm with approval. "I underestimated Victor's persistence, but not your resourcefulness." I caught my breath, still gripping Emily's hand. "He said there are others, Mrs. Bennet. People who'll come for the gems? What's he talking about?" Catherine's expression darkened, her gaze flicking to Victor, who was being led out to a waiting security van. "Victor always had connections," she said quietly. "Men like him don't work alone. Edward warned me about his network. Collectors, dealers, men who'd kill for a fortune like those gems." Emily's voice was steady, but her eyes were wide. "Grandma, what do we do? If there are more of them—" Catherine straightened, her resolve like iron. "We end this, once and for all. The gems go to the museum tomorrow. No more delays. And Jake, you'll finish the Duesenberg. We'll show the world that this family's legacy is stronger than any thief or traitor." She turned to me, her eyes softening. "You've proven yourself, Jake. Not just to me, but to Emily, to this family. Whatever comes next, you're part of it." I nodded, the weight of her trust settling over me. "I'll get it done, ma'am. For Edward." The next day, the estate was a hive of activity. The police took Victor into custody, and Catherine arranged for the gems to be transferred to a museum curator under heavy security. Robert and Margaret, still confined to their quarters, were silent, their roles in the conspiracy exposed. Emily stayed by my side as I worked on the Duesenberg, sanding the hood and measuring for new upholstery. But Victor's warning gnawed at me. Others who will come. Who were they, and how far would they go? That evening, as the sun set over the estate, Emily and I sat in the guest cottage, the photograph of Edward and Victor on the table between us. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice soft but heavy with doubt. I shook my head, my fingers tracing the words on the back. "The debt is still owed." "Not yet, Em. Victor's locked up, but he wasn't working alone. Someone else knows about the gems, and they're not going to stop." She leaned against me, her warmth grounding me. "Then we face it together. You, me, Grandma. We're stronger than they think." I kissed her forehead, my resolve hardening. "Damn right we are." But as we sat there, a faint noise broke the silence. A low, distant rumble, like a car engine approaching the estate. It wasn't security. Their vehicles were silent hybrids. This was something older, heavier, a classic. My heart skipped a beat, and I stood, moving to the window. Headlights swept across the lawn, and a black vintage car, a Cadillac maybe, idled at the edge of the property, its driver hidden in the shadows. The car's engine roared, then cut off, leaving an eerie silence. A figure stepped out, their silhouette tall and menacing, holding something that glinted in the moonlight. Was this one of Victor's others, come to collect Edward's debt? And what would they do when they learned the gems were gone? The Bennett estate was supposed to be safe now, with Victor Russo in custody and the stolen gems on their way to a museum. But as Emily and I sat in the guest cottage, a low, menacing rumble broke the night, a vintage Cadillac idling at the edge of the property. A tall figure stepped out, their silhouette clutching something glinting in the moonlight. Victor's warning echoed in my mind. There are others who'll come for what's mine. My heart raced. Was this one of his allies here to collect Edward's mysterious debt? And with the gems gone, what would they do when they found nothing left to take? The cottage's small window framed the Cadillac like a scene from a noir film, its chrome trim glinting under the estate's security lights. Emily's hand gripped mine, her breath shallow as we peered through the glass. The figure stood motionless, their face hidden in shadow. But the object in their hand, a gun or a knife, I couldn't tell, sent a chill down my spine. The night was too quiet. The estate's usual hum of activity silenced after the chaos of Victor's arrest. Catherine was in the main house, likely finalizing the gem transfer, and the security guards were stationed at the front gate, too far to see this intruder. "Jake," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "We can't just sit here. What if they're coming for Grandma?" I nodded, my mind racing. The wrench I'd used to fend off Victor was still in my jacket, but against an armed stranger, it felt like a toy. "We need to warn Catherine," I said, keeping my voice low. "But we can't go out the front. They'll see us. Is there another way to the main house?" Emily's eyes flicked to the back of the cottage. "The service path, through the garden, it's hidden by the hedges. We can get to the study without being seen." I grabbed the wrench, its weight reassuring despite the odds. "Stay close," I said, leading her to the back door. We slipped out into the cool night, the scent of roses and damp earth heavy in the air. The garden was a maze of manicured hedges, their shadows offering cover as we moved silently toward the main house. The Cadillac's engine had gone quiet, but I could feel the intruder's presence, like a predator stalking the edges of the estate. We reached the study's side entrance, a small door tucked behind ivy-covered trellises. I knocked softly, praying Catherine was still awake. The door opened almost instantly, and Catherine stood there, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with alarm. "Jake, Emily, what's happened?" I pulled her inside, closing the door behind us. "There's someone out there," I said, keeping my voice low. A black Cadillac pulled up, and a guy got out, tall, holding something that looked like a weapon. "I think it's one of Victor's people." Catherine's face hardened, but there was no surprise in her eyes, only grim resolve. "I should have known?" she murmured, moving to her desk. She opened a drawer, pulling out a small, sleek phone. A burner, I realized, not her usual one. Victor's network runs deep. I've had my suspicions, but I hoped we'd have more time. Emily's voice was sharp with worry. "Grandma, what do you mean? Who are these people?" Catherine hesitated, her fingers tightening around the phone. "Your grandfather's deal with Victor wasn't just about gems. It was part of a larger operation. Collectors, dealers, Men who traded in secrets as much as wealth. Edward got out, but Victor stayed in, building connections with people who don't forgive debts. I thought of the photograph, Edward's tense expression next to Victor's predatory smile, the words, "The debt is still owed." "So this guy outside, he's here for the gems?" I asked. Catherine shook her head. "The gems were part of it, but Victor's people want more. Control, leverage, maybe even revenge. If they know the gems are gone, they'll come for something else. Us, the estate, or the collection itself." A sharp knock at the study's main door made us all freeze. "Mrs. Bennet," a deep, unfamiliar voice called, smooth but laced with menace. "We need to talk. Open the door, or I'll let myself in." Emily's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. I gripped the wrench tighter, my heart pounding. Catherine's eyes flicked to the door, then to me. "Jake," she whispered. "The security panel, behind the bookshelf. Hit the alarm. It'll bring the guards." I nodded, moving silently to the bookshelf. I found the panel, a small keypad hidden behind a false panel, and punched in the code Catherine had given me days ago. A faint beep sounded, and I prayed the guards were close. But the knocking turned into a heavy thud, the door rattling in its frame. Whoever this was, they weren't waiting. Catherine grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her toward the back of the room. "Stay behind the desk," she said, her voice calm but urgent. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Jake, you've faced down worse than this. Hold him off until help arrives." I didn't have time to argue. The door splintered with a loud crack, and the tall figure from the Cadillac stepped inside, his face now clear in the firelight. He was younger than Victor, maybe in his 40s, with sharp cheekbones and cold gray eyes. A pistol gleamed in his hand, held low but ready. "Mrs. Bennet," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You've been hard to reach. Where are the gems?" Catherine stood tall, unflinching. "Gone," she said, her tone defiant. "Donated to a museum, out of your reach. You're too late." The man's smile was thin, dangerous. "Then you've made a costly mistake. Victor warned you. The debt isn't just gems. It's loyalty, and I'm here to collect." He raised the gun, and time seemed to slow. I acted on instinct, hurling the wrench with all my strength. It hit his shoulder, not his head as I'd hoped, but it was enough to make him stagger, the gun wavering. I charged, tackling him to the floor, my hands scrambling for the weapon. He was strong, his elbow catching my jaw, but I held on, fueled by adrenaline and the need to protect Emily and Catherine. "Jake!" Emily screamed, but I couldn't look back. The man twisted, his knee driving into my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. The gun skidded across the floor, landing near the desk. Catherine dove for it, her movements surprisingly agile, but the man grabbed my shirt, pulling me down with him. The sound of boots thundered outside, and the study door burst open as security guards flooded in, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" one shouted, and the man went still, his hands raised, his eyes burning with frustration. The guards pinned him, cuffing his wrists as I staggered to my feet, gasping for air. Catherine held the gun, her hands steady, her face a mask of fury. "Who sent you?" she demanded. "Who's behind this?" The man smirked, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "You think this ends with me? Victor was just the start. The debt's bigger than you know, and they'll keep coming." The guards hauled him away, his words echoing in the study. Emily ran to me, her arms wrapping around me, her voice shaking. "Are you okay? I thought he was going to—" "I'm fine," I said, holding her close, though my ribs ached and my jaw throbbed. "It's over, for now." Catherine set the gun on the desk, her expression grim. "It's not over," she said, echoing the man's warning. "Victor's network is still out there. We need to find out who they are and what they want." I nodded, my mind racing. The photograph, the notebook, the gems. It was all connected, but the bigger picture was still out of reach. What about the collection? I asked. If they're after more than the gems, the cars might still be a target. Catherine's eyes glinted with resolve. Then we protect them. Jake, you'll finish the Duesenberg. Make it a symbol of Edward's true legacy, not his mistakes. We'll tighten security, hire investigators, and root out anyone tied to Victor's network. Emily looked between us, her face determined. I want to help. This is my family too. Whatever's out there, we face it together. I squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of pride. Deal. But first, I need a new wrench. Catherine's laugh was soft but genuine, a rare break in her iron facade. You've earned more than that, Jake. You're family now, whether Robert likes it or not. As we left the study, the estate buzzing with police and security, I couldn't shake the man's words. The debt's bigger than you know. The Duesenberg waited in the garage, its restoration my mission, but the photograph's cryptic message burned in my mind. Who else was out there? And what did they want from the Bennetts? The next morning, as I returned to the garage, a letter was taped to the Duesenberg's hood, written in sharp, unfamiliar handwriting. The debt isn't paid. Meet me at the old warehouse on Route 17, midnight, or the Bennetts lose more than their cars. Who was behind this new threat, and what would I find at the warehouse? The Bennett estate was a fortress under siege. After fending off Victor Russo and his armed ally, I thought we'd secured Edward Bennett's hidden gems and exposed the family's secrets. But as I returned to the West Garage to continue restoring the Duesenberg, a chilling letter was taped to its hood. The debt isn't paid. Meet me at the old warehouse on Route 17 midnight, or the Bennetts lose more than their cars. My heart pounded. Who was behind this new threat, and what waited for me in that abandoned warehouse? With Emily and Catherine counting on me, I knew walking away wasn't an option. But stepping into this trap could cost us everything. The garage was bathed in the pale morning light. The Duesenberg's half-repaired hood gleaming under a fresh coat of primer. The letter's sharp, unfamiliar handwriting burned in my mind as I clutched it, the paper crinkling in my grip. Emily stood beside me, her face pale but resolute, her eyes scanning the words as if they might reveal the sender's identity. The scent of paint and metal filled the air, but the weight of the threat made the familiar space feel like a cage. "Jake, you can't go," Emily said, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. "It's a trap. Whoever wrote this, they're part of Victor's network. They'll hurt you." I shook my head, folding the letter and tucking it into my jacket. "If I don't go, they'll come here, Em. Your grandma, you, the collection, they're not safe until we end this. I need to know who's behind it and what they want." She grabbed my arm, her eyes blazing. "Then I'm coming with you." "No way," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "It's too dangerous. I'll handle this, and you stay with Catherine. She needs you here." Emily's jaw tightened, but before she could argue, Catherine's voice cut through from the garage doorway. "He's right, Emily," she said, striding in, her silk scarf fluttering like a battle standard. She'd clearly been listening, her sharp eyes taking in the letter in my hand. "But you're not going alone, Jake. We do this together, strategically." I handed her the letter, watching her face as she read it. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened, crumpling the edges. "Route 17, she murmured. "The old textile warehouse. Edward used it for storage years ago, before Victor's deal went sour. This isn't random." "You think it's someone from his old network?" I asked, my mind flashing to the photograph of Edward and Victor, the cryptic words, "The debt is still owed." Catherine nodded, her gaze distant but calculating. Victor wasn't the mastermind. He was the front man. Someone else pulled the strings. Someone with enough power to keep this going after all these years. We need to know who. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady now. Grandma, we can't let Jake walk into this blind. What if it's a setup? What if they're armed? Catherine's lips curved into a faint, steely smile. Then we prepare. Jake, you'll go to the warehouse, but not unprepared. I have contacts, private security, ex-military. They'll be with you out of sight, and I'll have the police on standby, ready to move if things go wrong. I felt a mix of relief and unease. Catherine's confidence was reassuring, but the idea of facing an unknown enemy in an abandoned warehouse, even with backup, made my stomach twist. What do they want? I asked. The gems are gone. What's left of this debt? Catherine's eyes darkened. It's not just about money. Edward's deal with Victor's network wasn't just gems. It was information, leverage. They traded in secrets, and Edward knew things that could ruin powerful people. That notebook, the photograph, they're pieces of a bigger puzzle. Emily's face paled. You think Grandpa was blackmailing someone? Not blackmail, Catherine said, her voice heavy. Protection. He kept records to ensure they'd leave us alone. But when he died, those records became a liability. Victor's people want them destroyed, or they want to use them. I thought of the notebook, locked in Catherine's safe, its pages filled with Edward's confessions. Then, we need to get to that warehouse before they come here, I said. I'll go, but I want Emily safe. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but Catherine raised a hand. You'll stay with me, Emily. We'll monitor from the estate, coordinate with security. Jake's not alone in this. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. Catherine's security team, 3 ex-Marines in dark tactical gear, met me at the guest cottage, briefing me on the plan. They'd shadow me to the warehouse, staying hidden unless I signaled for help. A small earpiece, barely noticeable, would keep me connected to them and Catherine. As the sun set, I climbed into my pickup truck, the wrench tucked under the seat, more for comfort than practicality. Emily hugged me tightly, her eyes wet but fierce. Come back to me, Jake, she whispered. Always, I said, kissing her forehead, then drove off, the estate's lights fading in my rear-view mirror. Route 17 was a desolate stretch of road, flanked by overgrown fields and rusted industrial relics. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton of brick and steel. Its windows shattered, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The Cadillac from the night before was parked out front, its engine cold, no sign of the driver. I pulled up 100 yards away, my headlights off, and waited, the earpiece crackling softly as the security team confirmed their positions. Perimeter secure, a voice said in my ear. No movement yet. Proceed with caution. I stepped out, the night air cold against my skin, the wrench heavy in my jacket. The warehouse doors were ajar, a faint glow spilling out from inside. I moved slowly, my boots crunching on broken glass, every nerve on edge. The interior was a cavern of shadows, lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Crates and rusted machinery lined the walls, and in the center stood a figure. A woman, tall and angular, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes glinting like steel. You're Jake Thompson, she said, her voice smooth but cold. The mechanic who's been causing so much trouble. I stopped, my hand hovering near the wrench. And you're the one sending threatening notes, I said, keeping my tone steady. Who are you, and what do you want? She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the concrete. My name is Elena Markov. Victor worked for me. Edward Bennett made a deal with my family decades ago, and he broke it. Those gems were only part of it. He kept records, names, deals, secrets that could destroy us. I want them. My heart sank. The notebook. The gems are gone, I said, stalling. Donated, and I don't have any records. Elena's smile was sharp, predatory. Don't play dumb, Jake. The notebook in Catherine's safe, Edward's little insurance policy. Hand it over, or the Bennett estate becomes a very public scandal. I heard a faint rustle in the shadows, my backup moving into position. And if I don't? I asked, buying time. Her smile vanished, and she pulled a small pistol from her coat. Then you don't leave this warehouse, and neither does your girlfriend. Rage flared in my chest, but before I could respond, the earpiece crackled. Now! A voice barked, and the warehouse erupted in chaos. Floodlights blazed, and the security team burst in, weapons drawn. Elena spun, firing wildly, but the Marines were faster, disarming her in seconds and pinning her to the ground. Clear! One shouted, and I exhaled, my legs shaking as the adrenaline drained. Elena glared up at me, her face twisted with fury. You think this ends it? She spat. You have no idea what's coming. The police arrived minutes later, taking Elena into custody. Back at the estate, Catherine and Emily were waiting, relief washing over their faces as I walked in. I told them everything. Elena, her demands, the notebook. Catherine's expression was grim but resolute. She's right about one thing, Catherine said, holding the notebook. This isn't over. Edward's secrets go deeper than I thought, but we'll face it together. I nodded, pulling Emily close. The Duesenberg waited, a symbol of redemption, but the notebook's secrets loomed larger than ever. Days later, as I worked on the Duesenberg, a new letter arrived, slipped under the garage door. No name, no signature, just a single line. The real debt is in the Bugatti. Check the engine. What final secret was hidden in Edward's collection, and who was still out there, watching?